Pronation is a very misunderstood concept, and I see it as one of the most important movements in the body, especially for hikers. But if you have a flat foot with a low arch and maybe a foot that points outwards laterally, likely what you've been told is in order to fix that overpronation, you need to buy a supportive shoe that prevents that motion or use some kind of insert or orthotic that will correct the problem. But I want to add another perspective on this. I'm going to give my opinion in this video on this complex topic. If you're the kind of person that wants to understand your foot, understand the movement of your body, and be able to do whatever you want in the mountains, I think this video is really going to help. Let's get into it. The first thing you need to understand about pronation is that it's not a static position in space. It's a movement that the foot can express. In order to understand pronation, we need to zoom out and look at it through a perspective of movement and see where pronation happens in the gait cycle, which is essentially our pattern of walking. So if we're talking about the gait cycle on this right leg, that is early stance, we're in supination. We move into pronation on mid stance, and then late stance, the foot returns to supination to push off and get us onto this other foot. So it's a pattern of supination into pronation and then back to supination again. Pronation happens in the mid stance of gait, where your midfoot first makes contact with the ground. When we look at the foot and understand what happens in pronation, the calcaneus needs to slide backwards. The cuneiform square-shaped muscles in the midfoot need to create space, and the whole foot needs to be able to press into the ground. And as your midfoot is kind of collapsing into the ground, we're getting our hips, our torso, and our head on top of the foot. And it's the gravity and your body weight that is compressing the arch down into the ground.
And because there's no muscles in the body that actively work to pronate the foot, many people believe that they can't improve their pronation, but that's where they're wrong. It's not a traditional strength exercise. You have to use gravity.
So in pronation, we see lengthening, widening of the foot, but also the dropping of the arch. When the foot lengthens, compresses, and flattens into the floor, this allows the foot to absorb gravity and the pressure of your body weight. And ideally, that force is distributed through the foot and into the ground and not shielded anywhere else in the body, like the knees or the calves or the tibia, for example.
And this problem doesn't always arrive in the form of pain in the foot. Often it's the structures in the body up the kinetic chain, like the knees or the hips, that start to provide symptoms, and a typical therapist is going to look only at that site and try and help you with the pain. And thankfully sometimes they get it right, but only if they study your feet first.
So the foot is constantly moving from a supinated position in early stance into a pronated position in mid stance, and then as we push off, we're going back into supination. And the foot needs to be able to express this in a healthy gait cycle in order to push us forward in space. Now let's talk about what pronation is not, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. What is typically called overpronation is when the whole foot is dumping inwards. Yes, there is some element of pronation there because there's often a lowering of the arch, but what I see this is actually foot eversion, where the whole foot is basically collapsing inwards and you're basically rolling in onto the inside of the foot. So put simply, if the foot can't genuinely pronate, the body will find some other way to compensate. And there can be many ways that this happens. The body often finds the strongest position that you're capable in, and it will find the path of the least resistance to get that movement to happen. But the important part here is those compensation patterns can often result in pain. Not initially, but often far down the road. And it's important to understand that this pain isn't predictable. Your body is a really intelligent structure and a compensation machine, and it will find a way to get the movement done until it can't. And at that point, the body's going to have to start to communicate with you in some way. And the only way that the body can communicate is through sensations. And often those sensations are painful ones. So you can continue to go down the path using compensations to make up for your lack of pronation, but at some stage that's likely going to come back to get you. And this is why I see using technology like footwear or an orthotic or some kind of insert to make up for the lack of pronation as simply just kind of kicking the can down the road. You're just delaying the inevitable. What has to happen if you want to hike for as long as you want for the rest of your life, is you need to learn how to genuinely pronate the foot. So now that you understand what pronation is, where it happens in the gait cycle, and why it's important, I want to talk briefly about this mislabeling of overpronation, because I think that's important to clear up. If you've been labeled as someone who's overpronates, that can lead you to believe that you don't need to work on pronation. And it makes sense, right? If you've been told by a therapist or a doctor or whatever that you overpronate, why would you then learn to properly pronate the foot? And this is where people get really confused. And that's why I think using this term of overpronation isn't actually that helpful. And we need to be a little bit more biomechanically correct and say, well, the foot is everting and doing a couple of different other things. And we can't just simply label a static position as being overpronated. And pronation is literally a movement in the gait cycle. So the type of footwear that I think will help encourage better movement of the foot has 4 main qualities. Number 1, the shoe allows sensation. There is hundreds or thousands of mechanoreceptors at the bottom of the foot that are constantly communicating with the brain about where you are in space and what is underneath your feet. So it's important that you can sense what is happening in the foot. Without that, it's going to be really difficult to make progress. The second thing is space. We need space within the shoe for the foot to be able to lengthen, to widen, and for the arch to come down. And if you have a supportive shoe where there is a high arch, yes, that gives you something to pronate into, which can be helpful, but we also need that space to be there for the foot to be able to lower into. The third thing is that the shoe needs to be able to have some ability to rotate. Because pronation is a rotational movement, there needs to be space in the shoe for the foot to be able to rotate, pronate and supinate and move around. And the fourth thing is that the shoe needs to be flexible, meaning that the shoe isn't helping or encouraging the spring mechanism that the foot needs to be able to express. In order to strengthen the foot, we need the big toe to be active, we need the plantar fascia and all the supportive tissue underneath the foot to be active, and we need to be able to access our glute max as we go into the propulsion phase of gait. And I know this goes against pretty much everything you've heard in the past about having a supportive ankle and arch support, and you can by all means go down that path. I'm happy for people to make their own decisions. And I think in many cases, if you're really busy and you don't have the time to learn about your foot, to work with movement in the foot and to understand it, it might just simply be an easier choice to go into a supportive shoe and hope that it doesn't come back to bite you at some stage. But the reality that I'm seeing every day when I'm working with people who are having knee pain and hip pain and lower back pain is that they don't have the ability to pronate their foot. And so I want to encourage you to get as interested in your feet as possible and choose a shoe that works for you, that at least allows some movement in the foot to happen. So I believe that spending some time barefoot and ideally spending more time in a barefoot style shoe, particularly in the natural environment, can be really, really helpful. But for many people, they're going to need to learn a few extra things about how the foot moves. And for that reason, I've partnered up with Vivo Barefoot. We have shot a small mini course that is going to be free with the purchase of the barefoot shoes for a limited time only. If you want to find out more about that, the link is in the description. We put a lot of time and effort into this course, and I think it's going to be hugely helpful for the people who are interested in their feet and want to be able to express that super important movement in the body that needs to happen in the gait cycle. That's about all for this video, guys. If you found it helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you on the summit.